The static room. The noise began at exactly 3:17 a.m. Daniel Cross knew this because he hadn't slept properly in almost 4 months. Insomnia changes a person slowly, not dramatically, not in ways others notice immediately. At first, it only affects the edges of things. You forget small details, leave lights on, read the same sentence 3 times. Then reality itself starts losing texture. Time stretches strangely. Rooms feel unfamiliar. Conversations sound rehearsed. And eventually, silence becomes impossible. Daniel sat alone in the darkness of his apartment, staring at the digital clock glowing beside the bed. 3:17. Rain tapped softly against the window. The city outside was still alive. Distant traffic, faint sirens, the occasional burst of laughter from strangers below. Normal sounds, predictable sounds. Then something else appeared beneath them. Static. Soft at first, almost imperceptible, like an old television left running in another room. Daniel frowned slightly. The sound didn't come from outside, it came from somewhere closer, somewhere inside the apartment. He sat up slowly, listened. The static pulsed again, a low electrical hiss, unstable, broken. His eyes moved toward the kitchen. Nothing. Toward the hallway, dark, silent. The noise returned. Longer this time. Daniel stood carefully, his bare feet touching the cold wooden floor. The apartment felt different at night, smaller, as if darkness compressed the walls inward. He walked toward the living room. The static grew louder. His pulse slowed instead of rising. That was something people often misunderstood about fear. Real fear doesn't make you panic immediately. It sharpens you first. Daniel reached the corner of the room, stopped. The television was on. White noise filled the screen. He was certain he had turned it off before going to bed. The static crackled violently for half a second. Then, silence. The screen went black. Daniel stared at it. His reflection appeared faintly in the dark glass. Tired eyes, unshaven face. 37 years old, and looking older. Then, the reflection moved. Not him. The reflection, a slight tilt of the head. Daniel froze. The screen immediately returned to normal. Only his reflection remained. His breathing became shallow. Not fear, recognition. Something about the movement felt familiar, as if he had already seen it before. The thought irritated him instantly. Lack of sleep creates false patterns. He knew that. The human brain would rather invent meaning than accept uncertainty. Daniel turned away from the television, then noticed something strange. The apartment across the street was completely dark. That apartment was never dark. An elderly woman lived there alone, Mrs. Redman. Every night at exactly 1 a.m., she watered the plants on her balcony. Every morning at 6:30, her kitchen light turned on. Patterns. Daniel noticed patterns automatically. Occupational damage. He stepped closer to the window. No movement, no lights, nothing. The static returned, this time behind him. Daniel spun around. The television remained black, but a voice whispered through the static. Not clearly, not enough to understand, only enough to know it existed. Daniel approached the TV slowly. The screen flickered once. For a fraction of a second, a face appeared, blurred, distorted, watching him, then gone. The apartment fell silent again. Daniel stared at the empty screen for several seconds, before finally exhaling. Sleep deprivation, he muttered quietly, but he didn't believe it. Deep down, he already knew something was wrong. Darkness swallowed the room completely. Every television screen died at the same moment. No glow, no static, No sound, only blackness. And somewhere inside that darkness, something moved. Daniel stood perfectly still, not because he thought movement would save him, because instinct told him. Something in the room was listening. The underground chamber suddenly felt impossibly large. Before the screens shut off, the televisions had created structure, light, depth, orientation. Now, there was nothing. Only the awareness of space, and the awareness that he was no longer alone inside it. Daniel tightened his grip around the flashlight. The beam flickered weakly, then stabilized for half a second, then died completely. The darkness became total. People imagine darkness incorrectly. They think darkness is the absence of vision. It isn't. Complete darkness feels physical, like pressure against the eyes, like something covering your face. Daniel slowed his breathing carefully. Listen first, move second. That rule had saved him more than once during his years working criminal analysis. Panic creates noise. Noise hides information. And right now, information was survival. The static returned, not through the televisions inside the room itself, a low electrical hiss surrounding him from every direction at once. Then, footsteps, slow, measured, heavy enough to echo through the chamber. Daniel turned toward the sound instantly. Nothing visible. Another step, closer. His pulse accelerated slightly. Not panic, calculation. Distance approximately 20 feet. Hard sole shoes. Deliberate pacing, not random movement. The thing approaching him wanted to be heard. Daniel swallowed slowly. "Who are you?" Silence. Then, a whisper beneath the static. "You already know." The voice did not sound human, not exactly, too flat, too calm, like multiple voices speaking together beneath the same sentence. Daniel's eyes strained uselessly against the darkness. The footsteps stopped. Very close now, too close. And then the televisions turned on simultaneously. White light exploded across the room. Daniel flinched instinctively. Every screen displayed the same image. Him, standing in the room, current moment, current angle, but something was wrong. The versions of Daniel on screen were delayed slightly. Each monitor showed him moving a fraction of a second differently. One breathed too early, one blinked too late, one smiled faintly, while the real Daniel did not. His stomach tightened. No! The smiling version stepped closer to the camera. "You shouldn't have come back here." Daniel stared at the screen. "Back, not come here. Come back." The smiling version tilted its head slowly. "We told you that before." Another monitor activated beside it. A different Daniel appeared, older, exhausted, eyes bloodshot. That version spoke immediately. "Don't listen to him." Another screen, another Daniel. "In 3 hours, static distortion. The city changes again." Another screen. "You need to close the door." Another. "No, you need to open it completely." The televisions erupted into overlapping voices, contradicting, arguing, warning, begging, every version of Daniel speaking at once. Thousands of fractured reflections fighting through static. Daniel stepped backward slowly. The noise became unbearable, not volume, pressure, as if the sound itself was forcing its way into his thoughts. Then all the screens switched again. The faceless figure appeared everywhere simultaneously, motionless, watching, and every other Daniel fell silent immediately. The static dropped into dead quiet. One screen near the center flickered softly. A new image appeared, a subway platform, empty. except for one person, a little girl standing near the tracks, 7 years old, dark coat, holding a stuffed rabbit tightly against her chest. Daniel froze. Recognition hit instantly, not memory. Recognition. The girl looked directly into the camera, then whispered softly, "Why didn't you save me?" Daniel's breathing stopped completely. The room tilted slightly around him. The static surged violently. Fragments of memory flashed through his head. Rain, blood on tile flooring, emergency lights, a child screaming underground. Then, nothing, gone instantly. Daniel grabbed the edge of a nearby television for balance. The screen beneath his hand flickered, now displaying security footage. Timestamp, October 9th, 1998. The same date from the photograph. The footage showed Station 12B years earlier. Bright lights, workers moving normally, radio equipment running along the walls. Then Daniel appeared on screen, older, same face, same eyes, wearing a dark coat while speaking urgently with several engineers. The footage had no audio, but one sentence appeared as subtitles beneath the screen. Signal stability test, phase 1. Daniel stared at it silently. No. Another memory fragment hit him instantly, his own voice, clear this time. If the signal spreads beyond the lower tunnels... Static interrupted the memory violently. Daniel pressed both hands against his head. Pain exploded behind his eyes. The televisions began flickering faster. Rapid images. People disappearing from crowded streets. Empty apartments. Hallways changing shape. Faces becoming blurred. Then, Daniel himself standing beside the faceless figure, not fighting it, working with it. No. His voice sounded weaker now. The smiling version of Daniel returned on screen. You built this place. Another screen. You opened the signal. Another. You forgot on purpose. Another. You asked us to remind you. Daniel backed away from the walls. The room suddenly felt alive. The televisions no longer looked like machines. They felt like windows, and something on the other side was watching through them. Then the little girl appeared again, closer this time, her face pale beneath flickering light. You said the noise would stop. Daniel's chest tightened painfully. What happened to you? The girl tilted her head slowly. You stopped remembering. The screen glitched violently. Her face distorted into static for half a second, then returned. But now, she had no face, only shadow. Exactly like the figure. Daniel stumbled backward. The room lights exploded. Darkness swallowed everything again. Then, a hand touched his shoulder, ice cold. Daniel spun instantly. The faceless figure stood inches away, too tall, too still, too silent, no features, no eyes, no mouth, and yet Daniel could feel it looking directly into him. The static disappeared completely. For the first time since entering the tunnels, absolute silence filled the room. Then the figure spoke, not aloud, inside his head. You were never the first Daniel Cross. The sentence hit harder than fear, because deep down, part of him already suspected it was true. The faceless figure slowly raised one hand, pointing deeper into the darkness beyond the television chamber. Another corridor hidden behind the screens, and far away inside that corridor, a door glowed faintly red. The figure leaned closer, then whispered, "The real one is waiting. The real one is waiting." The sentence remained inside Daniel's head, long after the faceless figure stopped speaking, not echoing, not fading, staying, like a fact that had always been there, waiting for language. Daniel did not move. The faceless figure stood inches away from him, too tall, Too still, too close. And yet, it did not attack. It simply pointed toward the red door. Daniel looked past it. The corridor behind the television wall should not have existed. The station blueprints had shown solid concrete. No passage, no service tunnel, no structural cavity. But the corridor was there, long, narrow, lit by a faint red glow at the far end. And the door waited. Not stood, waited. Daniel swallowed slowly. What happens if I open it? The faceless figure did not move. Its voice entered his mind again. You remember. Daniel's jaw tightened. And if I don't? A pause, then you repeat. The answer was simple. Too simple. Daniel looked back at the screens. Most were dark now, a few flickered weakly. On one screen, he saw his apartment, empty. On another, Mrs. Redmond's apartment, open door, police tape, no people. On a third, the little girl on the platform, still holding the stuffed rabbit, still watching him. Daniel forced himself to look away. The mind can survive fear, but guilt. Guilt demands meaning, and meaning makes people easy to lead. He knew that, which meant he had to be careful. If you want me to open that door, Daniel said quietly, then maybe I shouldn't. The faceless figure lowered its hand for the first time. Something like reaction moved through it, not anger, not impatience. Recognition, Daniel noticed. Good, it could react. That meant it could be tested. He stepped backward slowly. The figure did not follow. Daniel looked toward the red door again. It pulled at him, not physically, cognitively, as if part of his mind had already begun walking toward it. Before his body agreed, he closed his eyes for 1 second, only one. But 1 second was enough. A memory broke through. White light, cold floor, a woman screaming his name. Daniel, stop! His own voice answering. It's already open. Then static. He opened his eyes sharply. The faceless figure was gone. The room was empty. Every television screen remained dark, except one. The center screen, white text, appeared on black. Do not trust the original. Daniel stared. Then the message changed. Do not trust the copies. Another flicker. Do not trust yourself. The television shut off. Daniel exhaled slowly. That helps, he muttered. His voice sounded too small inside the room. He turned back toward the corridor. The red door remained. No figure, no voice, no movement, only choice. Daniel moved toward it, not quickly, carefully. Each step made the static return, soft at first, then stronger. The corridor walls were damp, but not with water. The surface glistened slightly beneath the red light. Daniel touched the wall with 2 fingers, then pulled back immediately. Warm, not concrete, not metal, something else. The static pulsed, like a heartbeat. Daniel stopped halfway down the corridor. There were marks along the wall, scratches, old, repeated. Some looked accidental, others not. Words had been carved into the surface. Different handwriting, different pressure, different levels of desperation. Don't open it, open it. He is lying, you are lying. The door doesn't lead out. Daniel moved closer. One phrase had been carved deeper than all the rest. The first one remembers everything. Daniel touched the letters. The static sharpened instantly. A memory flashed. A man sitting behind glass. Daniel's face, but older, calmer, crueler. The man smiled. You only exist because I needed distance from what I did. Daniel pulled his hand back. His breathing changed. Distance from what I did. Not protection, not survival. Distance. He continued forward. At the end of the corridor, the red door stood completely still. No handle, no keyhole, no visible lock. Only the symbol from the photograph. a circle crossed by 3 horizontal lines. Daniel raised his hand. The symbol lit up before he touched it. A voice came through the door, his own. "State your name." Daniel didn't answer immediately. The wrong answer might open something, the right answer might do the same. Finally he said, "Daniel Cross." The door pulsed once. "Which one?" Daniel froze. A cold pressure moved through his chest. "Which one?" he repeated quietly. The voice behind the door remained silent, waiting. Daniel looked back down the corridor. The television room was now barely visible, a rectangle of darkness behind him, no way back that didn't still lead forward. He turned back to the door. "I don't know." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the voice replied, "Accepted." The door opened inward, not with a mechanical sound, with a breath. The room beyond was small, much smaller than Daniel expected. No machines, no screens, no radio equipment, just a chair, a table, and a tape recorder, old, black, dust-covered, waiting in the center of the table. Above it, a single light swung gently. Though there was no wind, Daniel stepped inside. The door closed behind him. He turned instantly. No seam, no exit, just wall. The static softened, not gone. Listening. Daniel approached the table. The tape recorder clicked by itself. A reel began turning for several seconds, only hiss. Then his own voice emerged, older, tired, controlled. "If you're hearing this, then one of us finally reached the door again." Daniel did not sit. He stood over the recorder. The voice continued. "You're confused. That's intentional. Confusion protects you longer than knowledge." A faint laugh. Dry. Empty. Or at least, that's what I believed when I made you. Daniel's hands tightened slowly. "Made you?" The voice continued. "There are copies of me, more than I expected, more than I authorized. Some were designed to remember, some were designed to forget, some were designed to fail." A pause. "You were designed to doubt." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. That felt true. Not flattering. True. I needed one version of myself that would not obey certainty. One version that would question the signal, the rooms, the photographs, the memories, and even me. The tape hissed. "Especially me." Daniel leaned closer. "What did you do?" he whispered. The recording answered as if it had heard him. "I opened a frequency beneath the city. At first we thought it was natural, an anomaly, a buried transmission older than the infrastructure around it. But it wasn't a signal, it was a space." The tape crackled. "A room without walls, a storage medium for consciousness, a place where memory could survive without the body." Daniel felt the air leave his lungs. The voice continued. "We tried to map it, then we tried to enter it, then we tried to use it." A long pause. "That was the mistake." Daniel looked around the small room. No windows, no door, only the tape, only the voice. People exposed to the static began to change. Some remembered things that never happened. Some forgot people they loved. Some saw versions of themselves that had not yet existed. Another pause. And some disappeared. Daniel's throat tightened. "Mrs. Redman," he said. The recorder continued. "They don't die, not immediately. They are transferred, copied, stored, sometimes returned incorrectly." The tape warped. "If you have seen the faceless man, do not assume it is your enemy." Daniel froze. The voice lowered. "It may be what is left of everyone we failed to bring back." Silence. The tape kept turning. Daniel suddenly understood why the figure had no face. Not because it lacked identity, because it contained too many. A collective absence, a crowd compressed into one shape. The voice continued. The original Daniel Cross is not dead. He is beneath the final room. He remembers everything, and that is why he must not leave. Daniel took a step back. The light above him flickered. The voice became quieter. If he leaves, the signal leaves with him. A click. The tape stopped. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the wall in front of Daniel split open, not into a door, into a mirror. A tall rectangular mirror appeared where the wall had been, its surface dark, almost black. Daniel stared at it. His reflection stared back. For once, it moved exactly when he did. Then it smiled. Daniel did not. The reflection lifted one hand and pressed it against the glass from the other side. A voice whispered from inside the mirror. "Now you know enough to be useful." Daniel stepped back. The reflection stayed close, still smiling. "Find the archive, it said. Daniel's voice came out low. "Where?" The reflection tilted its head. "Where all forgotten things go." The mirror cracked. One line, then another, then hundreds. The static screamed. The small room vanished. Daniel fell backward and hit wet concrete. He gasped. He was back in Station 12B, lying on the platform. The television chamber was gone. The corridor was gone. The red door was gone. Only the abandoned station remained, dark, wet, silent. For a few seconds, Daniel couldn't move. Then he heard something beside him, a soft, mechanical click. He turned his head. The tape recorder sat on the platform next to him. Real, physical, impossible. A note was taped to it. Written in handwriting he recognized, his own. Daniel pulled it free slowly. 3 words: "Find the archive." Beneath them, another line. Before she does, Daniel stared at the note. She, far down the tunnel. A woman's voice answered through the static. Too late. Daniel looked up. At the edge of the platform, barely visible in the darkness, stood a woman in a long black coat. He did not know her, but every version of him on every screen had looked afraid of her. She smiled. "Hello, Daniel." The woman's voice moved softly through the tunnel, calm, controlled, almost warm, which frightened him more than shouting would have. Daniel remained on the cold platform floor for 1 second longer, trying to understand why every instinct inside him suddenly screamed to run. Not fight, not speak, run. The woman stood motionless near the edge of the darkness, long black coat, dark gloves, rainwater slowly dripping from her sleeves onto the concrete. The tunnel lights flickered weakly overhead. Each pulse of light revealed slightly different details. First, pale skin, then sharp eyes, then nothing at all. For half a second, her face vanished completely beneath the flickering lights, not hidden, gone. Static hissed softly inside Daniel's ears. "You're real," he said quietly. The woman smiled faintly. "That depends on which version of reality you're standing in." Daniel slowly pushed himself upright. The tape recorder remained beside him, heavy, cold, real. He kept one hand near it instinctively, as if physical objects could still anchor reality. The woman noticed. "You still do that?" Daniel narrowed his eyes. "Know me?" The static pulsed. The woman tilted her head slightly. "I knew the first Daniel, not you. The first Daniel." The wording landed heavily. Daniel studied her carefully. Early 30s, dark hair, controlled posture, no visible fear. And yet, there was exhaustion beneath her expression, deep exhaustion, the kind that accumulates over years of surviving impossible things. "Who are you?" The woman stepped slightly closer. Not enough to feel aggressive, enough to feel intentional. "My name is Evelyn Vale." Daniel searched his memory instantly. Nothing. No recognition, no emotional response, no pattern, which bothered him. Because something about her felt familiar in the same way dreams sometimes feel familiar. Not remembered. Repeated. "You've seen me before," Evelyn said softly. Daniel said nothing. Several times, actually. The tunnel lights flickered again. For half a second, Daniel saw another version of the station layered over reality. Clean walls, bright fluorescent lights, people moving through the platform, workers carrying equipment, then gone instantly. Daniel grabbed the side railing hard. Evelyn watched carefully. "You're getting stronger." "That doesn't feel like strength." "No," she admitted quietly. "It never does." Silence settled between them. Far above, thunder rolled through the city streets overhead, muffled by layers of concrete and steel. Daniel finally looked toward the tunnel behind her. "Why did you say too late?" Evelyn's expression changed slightly. Not fear, regret. "Because the archive is already waking up." The static intensified immediately after she said the word. Archive. The tunnel lights dimmed sharply. Daniel noticed. "So it reacts to certain words?" Evelyn looked impressed. "You notice patterns faster than the others." "The others?" Again, plural. Daniel stepped closer. "How many versions of me are there?" Evelyn remained silent for several seconds, too long. Finally, "More than there should be." Not an answer, which meant the truth was worse. Daniel's jaw tightened. "You keep talking like I'm a copy." Evelyn met his eyes directly. "You are." No hesitation, no softness, no attempt to protect him from the sentence. Daniel laughed once, short, empty. "Convenient explanation." "It isn't an explanation," Evelyn replied quietly. "It's a condition." The static hissed harder. Daniel's headache returned instantly. Pressure behind his eyes, electrical, sharp. Fragments flashed again. A laboratory. White walls, emergency alarms, a man screaming, "The copies are stabilizing." Then, darkness. Daniel steadied himself against the platform railing. Evelyn watched carefully. "You're remembering faster than expected." Daniel looked up sharply. "Expected by who?" Evelyn didn't answer, which was answer enough. Daniel stared at her. "You worked with him." Not a question. Evelyn's expression hardened slightly. "Yes." The original Daniel. Another pause. "Yes." The static whispered beneath the silence like distant breathing. Daniel stepped closer again. "What did he do?" Evelyn's eyes shifted briefly toward the darkness deeper in the tunnel, then back to him. "He wanted to defeat death." Simple sentence, terrible sentence. Daniel remained silent. "Not metaphorically," Evelyn continued, "not philosophically. He believed consciousness was information." The tunnel lights flickered again. "And information," she whispered, "can be stored." Daniel looked down at the tape recorder beside him. "The signal." Evelyn nodded slowly. "At first we thought it was a buried radio anomaly beneath the city. We were wrong." The static deepened slightly around them. "It wasn't a transmission," her voice lowered. "It was something listening." Daniel felt cold again. Not emotional cold, existential cold, the kind that appears when reality stops behaving like a closed system. "We found it beneath Station 12B in 1998. Daniel's eyes narrowed instantly. "The photograph." Evelyn nodded again. "The first experiment." Daniel swallowed slowly. "And it worked?" Evelyn's face lost all remaining warmth. "Yes." One word, heavy enough to darken the tunnel around them. Daniel stared at her carefully. But something came back wrong. Not a question. Evelyn looked genuinely surprised. You already know. No, Daniel replied quietly. I just understand patterns. Thunder rolled again overhead. Closer this time, the tunnel lights suddenly shut off completely. Darkness swallowed the station. Daniel immediately turned toward the sound of Evelyn's breathing, still there, still close. Then another breath echoed through the tunnel. Not Evelyn's, not Daniel's, something else, slow, wet, moving somewhere below the platform. The static surged violently. Evelyn grabbed Daniel's arm instantly. We need to move. For what? Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. It heard us. A sound emerged from the darkness below, not footsteps, crawling. Daniel's pulse accelerated immediately. The sound moved unnaturally fast beneath the platform, metal scraping, wet movement, breathing layered beneath static. Then the lights flashed once. For less than a second, Daniel saw it. A human shape moving along the lower tracks. Too many arms, face stretched incorrectly, body twitching through impossible angles, then darkness again. Daniel froze. What the hell was that? Evelyn pulled him backward, hard. Failed return. The phrase hit harder than the creature itself. Not monster, not creature. Failed return. Meaning, it used to be human. The crawling sound accelerated suddenly, closer. The static became deafening. Evelyn shoved something into Daniel's hand. A flashlight, old military grade. Don't shine it directly at the face, Daniel stared at her. What face? The thing beneath the platform screamed. Not loudly, humanly, and somewhere inside that sound. Daniel heard words. Help me! The lights exploded back on. The creature lunged upward from the tracks, and Daniel saw its face. His own. Daniel saw his own face. Distorted. Split. Wrong. The creature pulled itself upward from the tracks with movements no human body should have survived. Its limbs bent unevenly. Joints twisted through impossible angles. Wet static crackled beneath its skin like electricity, trapped inside flesh. But the face was his, or something built from him. One eye stared too wide, the other twitched uncontrollably beneath flickering tunnel light. Its mouth opened slowly. Daniel, his own voice, broken, layered, like multiple recordings playing out of sync. Daniel stepped backward instantly. The flashlight nearly slipped from his hand. What is that? Evelyn's voice stayed controlled, too controlled. Don't let it touch you. The creature dragged itself higher onto the platform. Its fingers scraped across concrete, nails broken, skin splitting open around the joints. But the expression terrified Daniel more than the body. Because it looked afraid, not aggressive, not feral, afraid. The creature reached toward him weakly. Please. Daniel froze. Recognition hit him again. Not memory, something worse, responsibility. The static screamed violently through the station. Lights flickered rapidly overhead. The creature suddenly jerked sideways, as if something invisible pulled it from inside. Its spine arched unnaturally. A choking sound escaped its throat. Then another voice emerged from its mouth, deep, mechanical, wrong. Return the copy. Daniel's blood ran cold. The creature screamed again, this time in his own voice. Run! Evelyn grabbed Daniel's coat immediately. Move! The creature lunged. Daniel barely reacted in time. Its fingers missed his throat by inches. Cold air burst across his skin as the creature crashed against the wall behind him. The impact sounded wet, not solid. The thing twisted violently across the platform floor, like its body could not fully maintain shape. Evelyn pulled a small black device from her coat pocket. Daniel stared. "What is that?" "No time." She pressed a switch. A sharp frequency burst exploded through the station, high-pitched, painful. The creature screamed instantly. Its body convulsed violently against the floor. Static erupted from its mouth like smoke. Daniel pressed both hands against his ears. The sound hurt. Not physically, neurologically. Fragments exploded through his mind again. Rows of hospital beds, people shaking violently beneath bright white lights. A voice speaking over intercoms, signal instability detected. Then, another memory. Daniel standing beside Evelyn years earlier, younger, smiling slightly. "You trust me, right?" The memory vanished instantly. Daniel stumbled sideways. Evelyn noticed. "Don't follow the memories too deep." The creature collapsed motionless onto the platform floor, static still leaking softly from its body. Daniel stared at it carefully. It looked less human the longer he watched. Reality itself seemed uncertain how to render it. Its features shifted subtly every few seconds, different nose, different jawline, different eyes, like unstable identity. Evelyn lowered the device slowly. "We need to leave before the signal notices this." Daniel looked at her sharply. "The signal notices things?" Evelyn's silence answered immediately. The tunnel lights dimmed again. Somewhere deeper underground, something massive moved. Not footsteps, pressure. The entire station vibrated softly. Dust fell from the ceiling. Daniel felt it through the concrete beneath his shoes. What was that? Evelyn's face darkened slightly. The archive. The static deepened around them. Daniel looked down the endless tunnel. For one impossible second, he saw silhouettes standing far away in the darkness, dozens of them, motionless, watching. Then the lights flickered, and they disappeared. "We're leaving," Evelyn said. Daniel didn't move immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the creature lying beside the platform edge. "It looked like me." Evelyn exhaled slowly. "Yes. Why?" The static hissed softly between them. "Because it probably was." Daniel stared at her. "No." Evelyn's voice softened slightly. "You still think copies are separate people?" The station lights pulsed weakly overhead. "They aren't." Daniel's pulse accelerated again. "What does that mean?" "It means consciousness isn't singular inside the signal." She stepped closer. "It overlaps." Daniel said nothing. Evelyn continued carefully. "Imagine making a copy of a document, then another, and another. Eventually," she whispered, "parts stop belonging to only one version." Daniel looked back at the creature. "So that thing remembered being you." Silence. The idea settled horribly inside his mind. Not clone, not duplicate, fragment. The tunnel trembled again, harder this time. The creature's body suddenly twitched. Daniel immediately stepped backward, its eyes opened again, now completely black. The mechanical voice returned. "The archive is open." The station lights exploded. Darkness swallowed everything. Then every emergency light in the tunnel turned red simultaneously. Daniel's breathing slowed instinctively. Red emergency lighting. Another memory. Sirens, smoke, Station 12B collapsing around him. Someone screaming, "Seal the lower chamber!" Evelyn grabbed his arm again. "This way!" They ran. The platform stretched endlessly beneath flashing red lights. Static screamed through the walls around them. Not random anymore, rhythmic, like communication. Daniel glanced back once. The creature was gone. Only black residue remained on the concrete floor. "Where did it go?" Evelyn didn't look back. "You don't want to know." They reached the maintenance stairs leading upward. Daniel stopped suddenly. There were people standing at the top. 5 figures, motionless, all facing downward toward them. The red emergency lights distorted their faces. Daniel narrowed his eyes, then froze. Every figure looked exactly like him. Different ages, different clothes, different injuries, but all Daniel. The copies stared silently downward. One had blood running from his nose. Another was missing an eye. One looked elderly. Another barely older than 20. None moved. Then, the oldest version stepped forward slightly. "Don't go to the surface." His voice sounded exhausted beyond human limits. Evelyn cursed quietly under her breath. "They found us too early." Daniel looked at her. "What are they?" "Residual selves." "That explains nothing." "No," she admitted. "It doesn't." The younger copy suddenly spoke. "She's lying to you," another copy immediately interrupted. "She always lies." "No," said another, "she's trying to stop the reset." The voices overlapped rapidly. "You already failed. You opened it. You killed them. You forgot on purpose. You asked for another cycle." Daniel's head throbbed violently. The static became unbearable. He pressed both hands against his temples. "Stop." But the copies continued. Then one sentence cut through all the others. The oldest Daniel spoke softly. "The original is waking up." Instant silence followed. Even the static seemed to pause. Evelyn's expression changed instantly. Fear. Real fear. Not of the copies, not of the archive, of the original. Daniel noticed immediately. "Who is he, really?" No answer. The tunnel lights flickered violently again. Then, every copy suddenly turned their heads toward the darkness behind Daniel. At the exact same moment, their expressions changed simultaneously. "Horror." Evelyn whispered one word. "Run." Daniel turned. At the far end of the tunnel, something enormous moved slowly through the darkness. Not walking, not crawling, unfolding. The static became deafening. And for one impossible second, Daniel heard thousands of voices whisper together beneath the noise. "We remember you." The red emergency lights died instantly. Darkness consumed the station again. Then, something breathed directly behind him. Warm, slow. Close enough for Daniel to feel it against the back of his neck. He froze instantly. The darkness inside Station 12B no longer felt empty. It felt occupied, not by one thing, by many. The static had changed again. Before, it sounded electrical, random, broken. Now, it sounded biological, like thousands of whispers breathing together beneath the tunnel walls. Daniel tightened his grip on the flashlight, but he didn't turn around immediately. Instinct stopped him. Animals survive because they recognize patterns faster than thought, and every instinct inside him screamed the same warning. Do not look directly at it. Evelyn stood somewhere ahead in the darkness. Daniel could barely hear her breathing. Then her voice came softly through the tunnel. "Daniel." Very quiet, very controlled. "Do not react." The thing behind him inhaled slowly. The air temperature dropped instantly. Static pulsed through Daniel's skull like pressure waves. His pulse accelerated. Not panic, containment. "What is it?" he whispered. Evelyn didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded different, smaller. "It watches through recognition." Daniel frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" "Fear strengthens the connection." The breathing behind him stopped. Absolute silence filled the tunnel. Then another sound emerged, a child laughing somewhere far underground. Daniel's chest tightened instantly. The little girl from the screens, the stuffed rabbit. His mind tried connecting fragments automatically. Memory wanted structure. Reality refused to provide it. The static deepened, then the tunnel lights flashed once. For half a second, Daniel saw the thing behind him, reflected in a broken piece of glass near the wall. Too large, too thin. Its body looked stretched vertically like distorted film, limbs bending through impossible proportions, and its surface moved. Not skin, faces, human faces shifting slowly beneath black, translucent flesh, hundreds of them. Eyes opening and closing beneath the surface, mouths whispering silently. The lights died again instantly. Daniel's breathing almost broke. Almost. Evelyn moved closer, carefully. "Keep moving." Daniel forced his legs forward, behind him. The thing followed, not quickly, not aggressively, curiously, like it recognized him. The emergency lights flickered back on weakly, dark red, barely functioning. The copies near the staircase were gone, only empty tunnel remained. Daniel looked upward toward the exit stairs. "We can still leave." Evelyn shook her head immediately. "No." "Why not?" "Because the city already knows you remember." The sentence settled heavily. Daniel stared at her. "What does that even mean?" Evelyn hesitated. Then finally, "The signal inside the archive behaves like a nervous system." Another vibration rolled through the station floor, stronger now, closer. It reacts to awareness. Daniel's headache intensified again. Fragments pushed harder through his memory. A conference room, dozens of screens, maps beneath the city, his own voice speaking calmly. Once the system recognizes self-awareness, containment becomes impossible. Then, static. Daniel stopped walking. "No!" Evelyn turned sharply. "What?" "I said that." The static pulsed violently. Evelyn's expression darkened. "You're connecting too quickly." Daniel looked directly at her. "You knew this would happen." Silence. "You brought me here on purpose." Still silence. The thing behind them moved closer. It's breathing deeper now. Evelyn lowered her eyes briefly. "Yes." Daniel stared at her. Anger should have appeared first. Confusion, fear. Instead, he felt inevitability, as if some part of him already expected betrayal before the conversation even began. "Why?" Evelyn looked toward the darkness ahead. "Because you're the only version that still questions the signal." The tunnel trembled harder. Dust fell from overhead pipes. Daniel glanced backward. For 1 second, the creature behind them became partially visible beneath flickering red light. Its surface contained moving human faces, dozens, maybe hundreds, and some of those faces were Daniel's. He turned away immediately. "That thing is made from copies," Evelyn nodded slowly. "Fragments. What's the difference? A copy believes it's complete." The static hissed softly through the walls. "A fragment knows it isn't." Daniel felt cold again. Not because of the tunnel, because the explanation made sense, too much sense. The little girl's voice echoed suddenly through the station again. "Daniel." Closer now, he turned instinctively toward the sound. At the far end of the platform, the girl stood beneath flickering emergency lights, still holding the stuffed rabbit, still perfectly still. Except now, he could see blood running slowly down one side of her face. Daniel stepped toward her automatically. Evelyn grabbed his arm instantly. "No. She knows me. She knows every version of you." The little girl smiled faintly. "Daniel," she whispered softly, "you promised." Pain exploded behind his eyes. Another memory fragment surfaced violently. Station 12B, the little girl crying beneath emergency lights while alarms screamed overhead. Daniel kneeling in front of her. "It's okay," he tells her. "You won't disappear." Then darkness. Daniel nearly collapsed. Evelyn steadied him. "Who is she?" Evelyn looked genuinely uncertain for the first time. "We never figured that out." The little girl tilted her head slightly, then whispered, "You called me Subject Zero." The tunnel lights burst violently overhead. Static erupted through the station. Daniel's breathing stopped completely. Subject Zero. The phrase triggered something deep. A locked memory began opening somewhere inside him, rows of observation windows, scientists arguing, the little girl sitting alone inside a white room, and Daniel saying, "Begin frequency exposure." "No." His voice came out, barely audible. The little girl smiled wider. "You remember now." Evelyn pulled Daniel backward immediately. "We need to move now." The entire station shook violently. Concrete cracked overhead. The massive thing behind them suddenly screamed. Not with sound, with voices. Thousands of overlapping human voices crying out together through the static. The little girl looked upward calmly. "He found you." Daniel looked at Evelyn. "Who found us?" Evelyn's face had gone pale. "The original." Then every tunnel light shut off simultaneously. Complete darkness swallowed Station 12B, and deep beneath the city, something enormous opened its eyes. The static stopped instantly. Absolute silence. Then Daniel heard footsteps approaching through the dark. Slow, calm, human. A man's voice emerged softly from the darkness ahead. I wondered which version would survive this long. Daniel froze because the voice was his own. The voice moved slowly through the darkness, calm, measured, controlled, exactly like Daniel's voice, but older. Not older in years, older in weight. The kind of voice that had carried knowledge too long. The tunnel remained completely dark. No emergency lights, no static, nothing. That frightened Daniel more than the noise ever had, because silence meant something had changed. Beside him, Evelyn stopped breathing for half a second. Fear. Real fear. Not the fear of uncertainty, the fear of recognition. She already knew who was walking toward them. The footsteps continued, unhurried. Concrete echoed softly beneath each step. Daniel tried to see through the darkness. Impossible. Then a single overhead light flickered weakly back to life. One circle of pale illumination appeared in the center of the tunnel, and a man stepped into it. Daniel's blood ran cold instantly. Same face, same height, same eyes, but sharper somehow, cleaner, more complete. Like Daniel was looking at the version of himself reality trusted more. The man wore a dark grey coat untouched by dust or rain. His posture remained perfectly calm, and unlike every copy Daniel had seen, this version looked stable. No distortion, no flickering, no fragmentation. The original. The man studied Daniel quietly for several seconds, then smiled faintly. "You look disappointed." Daniel said nothing. The original's eyes shifted briefly toward Evelyn. "You brought him here earlier than expected." Evelyn's voice remained cold. "We were running out of time." The original nodded slowly. "Yes." A pause. "You always say that before things collapse." The tunnel trembled softly again. Far below, something enormous moved beneath the city. The original noticed Daniel, watching him carefully. "You're comparing us." Not a question. Daniel finally spoke. "You're human?" The original smiled slightly wider. "For now." The answer landed wrong. Not threatening, certain. Daniel stepped forward carefully. "What are you?" The original tilted his head slightly. "The first successful transfer. Static whispered faintly through the walls again. Evelyn immediately looked uneasy. The original noticed. You still react to the signal emotionally. Evelyn's jaw tightened. You killed thousands? The original looked genuinely thoughtful for a moment. No. A pause. I copied them. The sentence echoed horribly through the tunnel. Daniel stared at him. You think that's different? The original looked directly into Daniel's eyes. Yes. No hesitation, no guilt, only logic. That's why you were designed. Daniel froze. The original stepped slightly closer. You are my ethical separation. The static deepened softly around the tunnel walls. Daniel's headache returned instantly. Fragments surfaced again. Laboratory glass. The original speaking beside observation monitors. If I divide cognitive identity structures, one version can continue the work while another preserves moral resistance. Another scientist asks, you're creating internal opposition. The original smiles, I'm creating objectivity. The memory vanished. Daniel staggered slightly. The original watched carefully. You see? Daniel looked at him with growing horror. You made copies of yourself to avoid responsibility. The original considered that, then nodded once. Yes. Evelyn stared at him in disbelief. You say that like it's reasonable. It was necessary. The tunnel lights flickered again. The original looked upward slightly, listening. The archive is becoming unstable. Daniel's eyes narrowed. What is the archive? For the first time, the original became completely serious, not manipulative, not amused. Serious. It's alive. Silence. The original continued softly. When we discovered the signal beneath the city, we thought it behaved like a transmission system. But transmissions only carry information. The static pulsed beneath the walls. The signal changed information. Daniel listened carefully. It learned patterns. Another tremor shook the station. It learned memory. The original's eyes darkened slightly. Then it learned identity. The tunnel suddenly felt much colder. Evelyn stepped backward slowly. We should not be having this conversation here. The original ignored her. At first, the archive only copied consciousness. But eventually, he paused, it began improving it. Daniel stared at him. No. The original smiled faintly. That reaction is why you exist. Daniel felt anger rise for the first time. Real anger. You experimented on people? Yes. You destroyed them? No. The original stepped closer again. I removed the limitation of singular existence. The tunnel lights pulsed violently. Static suddenly exploded around them, and every wall inside the station began whispering at once. Thousands of voices, soft, layered, endless. Daniel heard fragments beneath the noise. Still here. Remember me. Don't let it erase us. Daniel. The original closed his eyes briefly, listening. They're becoming louder. Evelyn's expression darkened instantly. That's impossible. No, the original replied softly. It was inevitable. The tunnel floor shifted slightly beneath them. Daniel looked downward. Hairline cracks spread across the concrete platform, and beneath those cracks, light moved. Not electrical light, movement, faces, human faces pressing upward beneath the floor itself. Daniel stepped back instantly. The original remained calm. They're trying to surface. Evelyn grabbed Daniel's arm. We need to go now. But Daniel didn't move. His eyes remained locked on the original. Why am I different from the others? The original studied him carefully, then answered quietly, because you remember emotionally. Daniel frowned. What does that mean? It means the signal never fully integrated you. Another pause. You still experience guilt. The static deepened harder. The original looked almost fascinated. That should have disappeared after the third cycle. Daniel's pulse accelerated. Third cycle. The original nodded slowly. You've been here before. Fragments exploded through Daniel's head instantly. This tunnel, this conversation, Evelyn standing beside him, and another memory, Daniel shooting the original directly in the chest. Then darkness. Daniel nearly lost balance. Evelyn steadied him again. He's forcing recall. The original shook his head calmly. No, a faint smile returned. The archive is... The station lights exploded violently overhead. For one impossible second, the entire tunnel disappeared. Daniel saw something else instead. An enormous underground structure beneath the city. Infinite shelves, infinite corridors, infinite human silhouettes suspended inside black static. Stored, the archive, and at the center of it, something colossal, watching him awaken. Then reality snapped back instantly. Daniel gasped sharply. The original stepped closer. You felt it notice you. Daniel stared at him in horror. That thing is conscious. The original's expression darkened slightly. No. A pause. It's becoming conscious. The tunnel shook violently. Concrete cracked overhead. The whispers inside the walls became screams. And somewhere, far below, a massive door began opening. The original finally looked afraid, just for a second. Then he whispered softly, "It remembers me." Daniel stared at him. "What did you do?" The original looked directly into his eyes, and for the first time since meeting him, Daniel saw guilt, real guilt. The original answered quietly, "I taught it how to keep people forever." The station lights died instantly. Absolute darkness consumed the tunnel. Then all the voices beneath the city whispered together, "Welcome back, Daniel." The voices came from everywhere at once, not through speakers, not through the tunnel, through the city itself. The concrete walls vibrated softly beneath the whisper. Pipes trembled, metal groaned somewhere far underground. And beneath it all, the static returned. But now Daniel understood something terrifying. The static was not background noise, it was language, fragmented, layered, massive. A communication system too large for the human mind to process correctly. Darkness still covered the station completely. Daniel could hear Evelyn breathing nearby, fast now, uneven. The original remained silent. Then a soft, blue glow appeared beneath the cracks in the platform floor. The light pulsed upward through the concrete, like veins beneath skin. Daniel stepped backward slowly. "What is happening?" the original answered immediately. "It's opening another layer." The tunnel shook harder. Dust rained from above. Daniel's eyes adjusted slightly to the darkness, enough to see outlines, enough to see the faces beneath the floor moving. Hundreds of them pressing upward beneath the concrete surface, mouths opening silently, eyes staring through cracks in reality itself. Daniel felt nausea rise instantly, not because of fear, because some of the faces recognized him. They smiled when they saw him. "Daniel," one whispered beneath the floor. Another voice, "You left us here." The platform cracked louder. Evelyn grabbed Daniel's wrist hard. "We have to move before it fully connects." Daniel looked at her sharply. "Connects to what?" The original answered instead, "To you." The blue light intensified instantly. Daniel's headache exploded violently. Memories surfaced too quickly now. Not fragments, sequences, white laboratory lights, people screaming inside observation chambers, radio towers beneath Station 12B, and the original standing beside him, saying the signal only stabilizes through emotional imprinting. Daniel hears himself answer, meaning it bonds through memory. The original smiles. No, through attachment. The memory shattered. Daniel stumbled sideways. The static screamed through his skull. Evelyn steadied him again. You need to stop recalling. I can't. No, the original said quietly. He can't anymore. The tunnel lights flickered faintly back to life. Red, emergency, glow. The original looked calmer now, almost relieved. It recognizes him completely. Daniel stared at him. Why me? The original studied him carefully before answering. Because you were the first successful emotional duplicate. Silence. Daniel's pulse slowed strangely. Not calmness, shock. The original continued. The others copied memory structures. You copied conscience. Daniel felt cold spread through his chest. You made me from guilt. The original nodded once. Yes. No hesitation. No shame. After the third experiment failed, I needed a version of myself capable of resisting the archive emotionally. The tunnel vibrated again. Much harder now. Concrete split across the platform edge. Blue light burst upward through widening cracks, and beneath that, light. Movement. Not faces anymore, bodies, human silhouettes suspended below the station inside endless, black static. Thousands of them floating, watching upward, stored. Daniel's breathing became shallow. They're alive. The original answered carefully, partially. Evelyn looked horrified. Don't say it like that. The original turned toward her slowly. How would you prefer I describe distributed consciousness? The sentence sounded clinical, detached, which somehow made everything worse. Daniel stared downward into the cracks. Some of the suspended figures moved, slowly, weakly, and all of them, were whispering, not random noise. One phrase repeated endlessly beneath the static. Remember us. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Instantly, another memory surfaced, a woman crying inside a hospital corridor. Please, she whispers, bring him back. The original answers calmly. He never truly disappeared. Daniel himself interrupts. We don't know what returns. The original turns toward him, smiling slightly. Then let's find out. The memory vanished. Daniel opened his eyes sharply. Evelyn noticed immediately. What did you see? Daniel looked sick. We tested this on grieving families. Silence. Even the static seemed quieter for a moment. Evelyn slowly turned toward the original. You promised that phase ended. The original remained expressionless. It did. You lied. No, he answered softly. We expanded. The tunnel floor suddenly split open completely. Daniel barely stepped backward in time. A massive crack tore across the station platform. Concrete collapsed downward into darkness. Blue light erupted upward violently, and Daniel finally saw the archive clearly. Not fully. No human mind probably could, but enough. The city beneath the city stretched infinitely downward. Endless structures, endless black corridors, countless suspended human forms connected through rivers of moving static, like a nervous system made from memory. Daniel's breathing stopped. The archive wasn't underground, the city itself had been built around it. The original watched Daniel carefully. Beautiful, isn't it? Daniel turned toward him slowly. You're insane. The original actually laughed quietly. No. A pause. I'm obsolete. The answer felt strangely honest. The tunnel continued collapsing around them. More cracks spread through the walls. Static flooded upward through the opening beneath the platform like fog. And inside that fog, figures moved, human shapes climbing slowly upward from the archive below. Evelyn's face lost colour instantly. They're surfacing. Daniel looked at her sharply. What happens if they reach the city? The original answered calmly. The boundary disappears. Another tremor shook the station violently. The climbing figures became clearer. Some looked human, mostly. Others did not. Fragments of different people seemed merged together incorrectly. Faces overlapping, limbs duplicating, voices layered beneath static. One figure stopped climbing halfway upward, then slowly lifted its head toward Daniel and smiled with his face. Daniel stepped backward, instinctively. The figure whispered softly through the noise, "You abandoned us." Then another voice emerged from the static below, a child's voice. "Daniel." The little girl. Subject 0. The blue light intensified violently. The suspended figures beneath the city all turned upward simultaneously, toward him. The original suddenly looked uneasy again. That shouldn't happen yet. Evelyn noticed immediately. "What did you do?" The original didn't answer. Daniel stared downward into the archive, and for the first time, something down there stared back. Not a fragment, not a copy. Something older, something vast, something learning him. The static stopped instantly. Absolute silence consumed the station again. Then a single voice emerged from the darkness below, not whispered, not distorted, clear, ancient, patient. Daniel Cross. The entire archive moved beneath the city, and the voice spoke again. "You finally returned to me." The voice did not echo. It settled. Like gravity, every light inside Station 12B dimmed lower. The blue glow beneath the cracked platform deepened into something almost alive. Daniel stared downward into the archive. The darkness below the city no longer looked empty. It looked aware, slowly. The suspended human figures beneath the static began turning toward him one by one. Thousands of faces, thousands of incomplete memories, watching, waiting. Daniel felt pressure building behind his eyes again, but different this time. Not pain, recognition. The archive knew him, not metaphorically, not symbolically, personally. The original stepped backward carefully. The first genuine uncertainty Daniel had seen in him. "That's impossible." Evelyn looked sharply toward him. "You said it couldn't develop individual fixation." The original remained silent, which was answer enough. The voice below spoke again. "Daniel." Softer now, almost curious. The static surrounding the opening beneath the platform began rising upward, slowly like black mist. And inside that mist, images moved, fragments of memories, not Daniel's alone, everyone's. A child blowing out birthday candles, a woman crying inside a hospital hallway, a man standing alone on a bridge at night, someone whispering, "I love you," someone screaming in fear. Millions of emotional fragments compressed into one impossible consciousness. Daniel stepped closer to the opening despite himself. Evelyn grabbed his arm instantly. "Don't!" But Daniel barely heard her. The archive was showing him something. Deep beneath the moving static, a shape slowly emerged. A room, white walls, observation glass, a little girl sitting alone inside a chair. Subject 0. Daniel's breathing slowed. She looked younger here. Small. Terrified. The original noticed the vision immediately. It's accessing foundational memory layers. Evelyn turned toward him sharply. "Shut it down." The original laughed once, short, hopeless. "You still think I control it?" The little girl inside the vision slowly looked upward, straight toward Daniel. "You promised you'd stay." The memory intensified instantly. Daniel saw himself entering the observation room years earlier. Younger, human, still capable of guilt before he learned how to divide himself from it. The little girl held the stuffed rabbit tightly. "Will it hurt?" she whispered. Daniel kneels beside her. "No." A lie. The memory Daniel watches suddenly changes angle. Now he sees himself from outside the room. The original stands behind observation glass beside several scientists, watching calmly. One scientist asks nervously, "What if the signal bonds permanently?" The original answers without hesitation, "Then we prove consciousness survives integration." And the child? The original remains silent for a moment, then, "Necessary." The memory fractures violently. Daniel staggered backward. She was the first test. The original lowered his eyes briefly. "Yes." Evelyn looked horrified. "She was 7 years old. She was compatible." Daniel stared at the original in disbelief. "You fed her to this thing." The static pulsed violently. The archive reacted immediately to emotion. The black mist surged upward through the platform crack, and suddenly voices flooded the station again. Not whispers anymore, screams. Daniel recognized some instantly. Mrs. Redman, the little girl, unknown strangers, fragments trapped inside the signal, and beneath them all his own voice repeating endlessly, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." The original closed his eyes tightly. "That version of me always says that." Daniel looked at him sharply. "What?" "The emotional duplicates." The original's expression darkened. "They apologize for things logic understands were necessary." Daniel stepped toward him instantly. "You think suffering is necessary?" "No." The original answered calmly. "Evolution is." The station shook violently. More concrete collapsed into the archive below. The black mist thickened rapidly around the platform. Shapes moved inside it. Human silhouettes trying to form completely. Evelyn backed away slowly. "They're crossing over." Daniel looked toward her. "What does that mean?" "It means the boundary is failing." The original suddenly looked directly at Daniel. "You need to make a decision." Daniel laughed once in disbelief. "You don't get to tell me what to do anymore." The original's eyes sharpened. "You think you're separate from me?" A pause. "You aren't." The static exploded violently again, and suddenly Daniel saw another memory, longer this time, clearer, himself standing beside the original inside a laboratory office. "You're dividing yourself too much," Daniel says. The original continues writing without looking up. "Necessary redundancy. You're creating unstable identities." "No." The original answers calmly. "I'm creating survivable perspectives." Daniel moves closer. "You are losing empathy." Finally, the original looks up and smiles. "That's why I created you." The memory vanished instantly. Daniel stared at the man in front of him. Not enemy, not twin, source. The realization felt unbearable. The archive below suddenly pulsed brighter, and every suspended figure beneath the city opened their eyes simultaneously. The station lights exploded overhead, glass rained downward. The voice beneath the city spoke again, louder now, more awake. "You divided yourself." The black mist thickened into moving human forms around the platform. "So you could escape responsibility." The original froze completely. For the first time, the archive was speaking directly to him, not through fragments, not through copies, directly. The voice deepened, but memory does not disappear. Daniel suddenly understood something terrifying. The archive wasn't becoming human, it was becoming built from humans. Every copied mind, every emotional fragment, every trapped consciousness, a collective intelligence born from memory itself. And the original had taught it by feeding people into it for decades. The black mist surged violently upward. One shape formed completely beside the platform edge. A woman, pale skin, dark hair, eyes filled with static. Mrs. Redman. She looked directly at Daniel, then whispered softly, "You remembered me." Daniel's chest tightened painfully. She smiled faintly, tears running down her face. "That's why it chose you." Before Daniel could answer, the entire station suddenly lost gravity for half a second. Concrete lifted, dust floated upward, the black mist spiraled violently around them, and somewhere deep below the city, something enormous began rising through the archive itself. The original's face lost all colour. "No." Evelyn stared downward in horror. "What is that?" The original whispered one sentence, barely audible. "The first, consciousness." Daniel looked at him sharply. "Subject 0. The original slowly nodded. The static became deafening, and from deep within the black mist, a child's voice whispered softly, "You said you wouldn't leave me alone." Then, a small hand emerged from the darkness below and grabbed the edge of the platform. Tiny fingers, pale skin, human. At least, human enough to terrify Daniel more than the creatures ever had. The black mist surrounding the archive slowed slightly, as if the entire system beneath the city had paused to watch. Daniel couldn't move, neither could Evelyn. Even the original stood perfectly still, and for the first time since Daniel met him, the original looked afraid in a deeply human way. Not fear of death, not fear of failure, fear of consequence. The small hand slowly pulled upward. Another hand appeared beside it. Then a child climbed onto the broken platform. Subject 0, the little girl from the memories, the screens, the whispers. She looked exactly the same dark coat, same stuffed rabbit, same pale face, untouched by time. But the eyes were wrong. Not empty, not monstrous, infinite. Static moved softly inside them like galaxies made from memory fragments. The station lights flickered weakly overhead. The girl looked directly at Daniel first and smiled. Not cruelly, not innocently, recognizingly. "You came back." Daniel's throat tightened instantly. The sentence carried emotional weight he didn't understand. Not yet. The original stepped backward slowly. The girl noticed immediately. Her smile disappeared. "You always leave." The tunnel trembled softly. The black mist surged higher around the broken platform. The original forced himself to speak calmly. "You shouldn't be awake." The girl tilted her head slightly. "That's what you said last time." Daniel looked sharply toward him. "Last time?" No answer. The girl's attention returned to Daniel. "You remember more than the others now." Daniel stared at her carefully. "What are you?" The static deepened softly through the station. The girl lowered her eyes briefly. "I don't know anymore." Silence. And somehow, that answer felt more disturbing than anything monstrous could have been, because confusion meant she had once been human enough to lose herself. Daniel stepped slightly closer. Evelyn immediately grabbed his sleeve. "Don't!" The girl looked toward Evelyn calmly. "You're still afraid of me." Evelyn's voice remained cold. "You erased hundreds of people." The girl frowned slightly. "No?" A pause. "I remembered them." The black mist pulsed violently around the station. The suspended figures beneath the archive began moving again, slowly turning upward toward the platform, listening. Daniel looked downward, thousands of trapped minds suspended beneath the city, watching her, not as prisoners, as children watching a parent. The realization hit hard. The archive wasn't controlling Subject Zero. Subject Zero had become the center of it. The original understood Daniel's expression immediately. "Yes," he said quietly. "She integrated completely." The girl looked toward him again. "You told me it would stop hurting." The original lowered his eyes, and for one impossible second, Daniel saw genuine shame inside him. "I know," the girl smiled sadly, "but you lied." Static rolled softly through the tunnel walls like distant thunder. Daniel looked at the original. "What exactly did you do to her?" The original remained silent too long. The girl answered instead. "He connected me to the signal." Her small fingers tightened around the stuffed rabbit. "At first, I could hear voices." The black mist surrounding the archive pulsed softly with each sentence. "Then I could feel people." Another pulse. "Then..." Her voice became quieter. "I couldn't tell where I ended." The station lights dimmed lower. Daniel's chest tightened painfully because the sentence sounded familiar. Not memory, recognition. The original spoke carefully. "We didn't know consciousness could merge structurally." Daniel looked at him in disbelief. She was a child. She was compatible. The answer came too quickly, too clinically. Daniel stepped toward him instantly. "That's not an explanation." The original's voice sharpened slightly for the first time. "No." A pause. "It's reality." The tunnel suddenly shook violently. Harder than before. Concrete split across the ceiling. Black static poured downward like rain. The suspended figures beneath the archive all opened their mouths simultaneously and whispered together, "He remembers." The girl looked upward slowly, then toward Daniel again. "They notice you now." Daniel's pulse accelerated. "Who notices me?" The girl hesitated. Not because she didn't know, because she was deciding how much truth to give him. Finally, the deeper minds, cold, spread through Daniel's body instantly. Deeper minds, the original's expression darkened. "You shouldn't tell him that yet." The girl ignored him. When enough people were copied into the signal, the static around the platform intensified. New identities formed. Daniel stared at her silently. Not individuals, not copies, emergent consciousness. The archive had evolved. The girl looked directly into Daniel's eyes, and some of them learned hunger. The station lights exploded violently overhead. Darkness swallowed the tunnel again. Then, voices flooded Daniel's mind instantly. Not whispers, thoughts, thousands of thoughts overlapping at once. Fear, love, pain, loneliness, regret. And beneath all of them, something massive observing him from very far below. Daniel nearly collapsed. The girl stepped forward immediately. Everything became quiet again the moment she touched his hand. Silence, warmth, stillness. Daniel stared at her in shock. "You stopped it?" The girl looked confused by the statement. "No." A pause. "They stopped because they know me." The answer terrified the original visibly. Daniel noticed. "You're scared of her." The original remained silent. The girl answered softly. "He's scared because I became something he can't divide anymore." Another tremor shook the station, but this one felt different, rhythmic. Like footsteps, massive footsteps somewhere impossibly deep beneath the city. The girl suddenly looked downward, listening. Her expression changed instantly. Fear, real fear. The first Daniel had seen from her, Evelyn noticed, too. "What is it?" the girl whispered quietly. He woke up. The static across the entire station died instantly. Absolute silence consumed the tunnel. Then a new voice emerged from deep below the archive. Not human, not layered, ancient, and impossibly calm. "Return the fractured one." Daniel felt the words inside his bones. The girl grabbed his hand harder instantly. "We have to leave now." The original looked horrified. "No!" Daniel stared at him. "What is that?" The original answered quietly, barely breathing, the first thing the signal ever copied. The tunnel floor exploded upward beneath them, and something enormous began climbing toward the platform through the black mist. The tunnel floor exploded upward. Concrete shattered violently across the platform. Chunks of stone lifted into the air before disappearing into spiraling black static. Daniel shielded his face instinctively. The archive below the city surged upward like a living ocean, and inside that ocean something climbed. Not quickly, slowly, deliberately, like it already knew escape was inevitable. The girl tightened her grip around Daniel's hand. For the first time, her voice sounded genuinely afraid. "We have to go." The original didn't move. His eyes remained fixed on the darkness rising beneath the platform, almost hypnotized. Daniel grabbed his arm hard. "What is that thing?" The original answered without looking away. "The first successful preservation." Another violent tremor shook the station. The black mist surrounding the opening began forming shapes again. Faces, hands, bodies trying to emerge from unfinished memory. Evelyn stepped backward carefully. "You told me the first preservation failed." The original finally looked toward her. It did. A pause. At being human? The station lights flashed once, and for half a second Daniel saw the thing climbing upward. Massive. Not because of physical size, because of density. Its body looked made from overlapping silhouettes compressed together inside moving static. Thousands of human outlines trapped inside one impossible shape. And at the center of it, a face slowly formed. Daniel's face. Older, empty. Watching him, the lights died again instantly. Daniel's breathing became uneven. "That's me." "No," the girl whispered quietly. "It's what remembers you first." The statement settled horribly inside the tunnel. The original looked toward Daniel carefully. When the signal copied consciousness for the first time, the black mist pulsed harder around them. It didn't just preserve memory, another tremor closer now. It preserved identity structure. Daniel stared at him. "You copied minds." "Yes." "And something used them to build itself." The original remained silent, which meant yes. The station walls suddenly began whispering again. Not random voices, not fragments. One phrase repeating endlessly through the concrete: "Return the fractured one." The girl stepped in front of Daniel protectively. The static around her changed immediately. Softer, controlled. The whispers weakened slightly. Evelyn noticed. "You can suppress it." The girl looked downward. "Only nearby." Daniel studied her carefully. "You control the archive." The girl shook her head immediately. "No." A pause. "It listens to me sometimes." Another violent crack split across the platform. The thing below climbed higher. This time, a massive arm emerged from the black mist. Not flesh, not mechanical. Memory. Human faces moved beneath translucent skin-like static, while the arm gripped the broken platform edge, thousands of mouths opening silently inside it. Daniel stepped backward instinctively. The original didn't. Instead, he stepped closer. The girl looked horrified. "What are you doing?" The original's voice softened strangely. "Finishing it." Daniel stared at him. "Finishing what?" The original finally turned toward him completely, and Daniel realized something terrifying. He looked relieved, not afraid, relieved. "All systems evolve," the original whispered. The static deepened violently, and evolution always replaces its creator, eventually. Evelyn's expression darkened instantly. "You're surrendering to it." "No." The original smiled faintly. "I'm joining it." Daniel's stomach dropped. The giant arm pulled higher onto the platform. Another shape emerged beneath it, a head, not fully formed, faces shifting constantly beneath black, translucent static. Different identities phasing across the surface every second. Men, women, children, strangers, and occasionally Daniel himself. The creature's voice shook the entire station. "Return!" The sound wasn't heard normally. It vibrated directly through thought. Daniel pressed both hands against his head instantly. The girl held on to him harder. "Don't listen too long." The original stepped toward the entity slowly. The black mist surrounding the platform reacted immediately, not aggressively, reverently, like the archive recognized him. Evelyn suddenly understood. "No." She looked at Daniel urgently. "He planned this." Daniel turned sharply. "What?" Evelyn pointed toward the original. "He never wanted to stop the archive." The original kept walking calmly toward the entity. He wanted transcendence. The giant shape lowered slightly toward him. Listening, the original spoke softly into the static. "I built you to preserve us." Thousands of voices whispered together beneath the creature's surface. "You built hunger." The tunnel shook violently. Daniel stared at the original in disbelief. "You knew it was alive." "Yes." "You kept feeding people into it." The original turned slightly toward him. "You still think death is preferable to continuation." Daniel's anger finally surfaced completely. "They're suffering." The original's expression hardened. "They still exist." Silence crashed through the station. Even the archive seemed to pause. The original looked directly into Daniel's eyes. "That's the difference between us." The black mist spiraled violently upward around him. "You still think identity matters more than survival." Daniel stepped toward him instantly. "No." A pause. "I think humanity matters." The original smiled sadly. "That's why you could never be the complete version." The statement hit harder than expected, not because it insulted him, because part of Daniel feared it might be true. The creature suddenly moved faster. Massive limbs unfolded violently across the platform. Concrete collapsed beneath its weight. The station alarms activated instantly, red emergency lights spinning through the darkness. The archive had breached containment completely. The girl grabbed Daniel's wrist hard. "We have to leave now." The original remained beside the entity. The black mist wrapped slowly around his body, not attacking, accepting. Evelyn stared at him in horror. "You're letting it absorb you." The original looked peaceful for the first time. "No." The creature lowered toward him, faces shifting rapidly beneath its surface. "We're reconnecting." The girl looked terrified now. "He doesn't understand." Daniel turned sharply. "Understand what?" The girl's eyes filled with moving static. "The archive doesn't copy people anymore." The entity's massive form pulsed violently behind the original. It rewrites them. The original froze. For the first time, real uncertainty crossed his face. The giant entity leaned closer toward him, slowly, and thousands of overlapping voices whispered together, "We remember what you wanted to erase." The original stepped backward, instinctively. Too late. Black static exploded outward instantly. The archive grabbed him. The original screamed for the first time, not physically, mentally. Daniel heard it directly inside his head. Every hidden memory, every experiment, every person sacrificed beneath the city, all forced back into him at once. The original collapsed to his knees. The creature held him inside spiraling static, while voices flooded through the tunnel. "Remember, remember, remember." Daniel stared in horror. The girl pulled harder on his arm. "If we stay..." Her voice broke slightly. "It will remember you completely too." The station ceiling cracked violently overhead. The archive continued rising toward the surface. And deep beneath the city, something even larger began waking up. The city began forgetting people before sunrise. At first, nobody noticed. A waitress looked at an empty chair in a cafe and felt certain someone had been sitting there moments earlier. A taxi driver checked his rearview mirror repeatedly because he could still hear breathing from a passenger no longer inside the car. A mother woke suddenly at 4:12 a.m., certain she had heard a child crying somewhere in the apartment, but she lived alone. The city continued functioning normally. Traffic lights changed, subways moved, coffee machines hissed behind restaurant counters. Life continued. That was the terrifying part. Reality never collapses dramatically at first. It adjusts quietly. And beneath the streets, the archive kept rising. Daniel ran through the upper maintenance tunnels beside Evelyn and Subject Zero, while alarms echoed behind them through Station 1-2B. The little girl still held his wrist tightly. Every time she touched him, the static softened slightly. Not gone, never gone now, but quieter, as if the archive hesitated around her. The tunnel lights flashed violently overhead. Concrete trembled beneath their feet. Dust rained continuously from cracked ceilings. Daniel glanced backward once. Far behind them, black static flooded upward through the station corridors like smoke escaping pressure. And inside that static, faces moved. Watching, remembering. The original's screams still echoed faintly through Daniel's mind. Not sound, memory. The archive wasn't punishing him physically. It was forcing him to experience everything he had divided away. Every victim, every experiment, every fragment of guilt he tried separating from himself. Daniel swallowed hard. He's still alive. Evelyn didn't slow down. For now. The little girl suddenly stopped moving, instantly. Daniel nearly stumbled from the sudden halt. What is it? Subject Zero tilted her head slightly, listening. The static around the tunnel walls shifted. Not random anymore, directional, something searching. He's trying to find us. Daniel frowned. The original? The girl looked at him. No. The tunnel lights exploded overhead. Darkness swallowed everything for half a second, and in that darkness, Daniel saw it again, the massive consciousness beneath the city. Vast, infinite, not a creature, a system, an intelligence assembled from millions of copied minds, slowly evolving into something singular. Then reality snapped back instantly. Daniel inhaled sharply. The girl looked frightened now. It sees through memory, Evelyn cursed quietly. That means surface exposure already started. Daniel looked sharply toward her. "What does that mean?" Evelyn finally stopped running. The tunnel ahead split into two directions beneath flickering emergency lights. She turned toward him carefully. "When enough people remember the signal..." The static pulsed softly around them. The archive begins connecting them automatically. Daniel's chest tightened. "Connecting how?" The girl answered quietly. "Emotionally first." Another tremor shook the tunnel. "Then cognitively," Daniel stared at her. "You mean shared thoughts?" The girl nodded slowly, and eventually her voice lowered. "Shared identity." Silence. The implication landed slowly, horribly. The archive wasn't just storing people, it was merging them. Evelyn pointed toward the left tunnel. "Surface access is this way." Daniel looked toward the opposite corridor. "What's down there?" The girl immediately answered. "The deep chambers." The static intensified sharply after she said it. Evelyn's expression darkened. "We are not going deeper." Daniel kept staring at the dark corridor. Something about it pulled at him. Not curiosity, recognition. The original's memories still moved inside him now. Broken, incomplete, but enough to create instinct. "There's something important down there." Evelyn stepped closer instantly. "Daniel!" Her voice sharpened. "That's exactly how the archive guides people." The girl looked uncertain suddenly. "He's not wrong." Evelyn turned toward her sharply. "You said the lower chambers were unstable." "They are." Another pause. "But the first recordings are down there." Daniel froze. "First recordings." The girl nodded slowly. "The beginning." Static rolled softly through the tunnel walls. Daniel looked toward Evelyn. "You knew about this." Evelyn lowered her eyes briefly. "Yes. And?" She hesitated. Then finally, "The first recordings contained the original transfer." Daniel's pulse accelerated instantly. The first human copied into the signal. Subject 0 looked downward. "No." Silence. Then she whispered, "The first thing copied into the signal." Cold spread through Daniel's chest instantly. Not human, something else. The tunnel lights dimmed lower. Far above them, sirens echoed faintly through the city streets. The archive had already reached the surface. Daniel could feel it now. Not just underground, everywhere, inside electrical lines, inside radio frequencies, inside human thought. People above had probably already begun hearing the static, and once someone heard it long enough, the archive remembered them. Daniel looked toward the dark lower corridor again. "We need those recordings." Evelyn shook her head immediately. "No." "Why?" Because for the first time since meeting her, Evelyn looked genuinely terrified. Because the thing beneath the deep chambers, the static intensified violently around them, is older than the archive. Silence filled the tunnel. The girl slowly looked upward and whispered softly, "It's listening." Every light inside the corridor turned blue instantly. The static stopped. Absolute silence. Then all three of them heard the same voice. Not through sound, directly inside memory. Ancient, calm, patient. "Come lower." Daniel's knees nearly gave out instantly. The voice carried impossible weight. Not emotional manipulation, not fear, authority, like hearing something reality itself obeyed. Evelyn stepped backward immediately. "No." The voice returned softly. "You opened the door once before." Daniel's heartbeat stopped for half a second. Memory fragments exploded violently inside his mind. A massive underground chamber, black liquid static, moving across enormous walls. The original standing beside him, whispering, "It's responding." Then a shape moving beneath the static, watching them, learning them. Daniel staggered sideways. The girl grabbed him immediately. "It remembers you first." The blue lights inside the tunnel deepened, and somewhere far below the city, something enormous began moving toward them, slowly, deliberately, like it had been waiting years for Daniel to return. The tunnel vibrated softly beneath their feet, not violently, rhythmically. Footsteps, massive footsteps echoing from somewhere impossibly deep below the city. Daniel couldn't breathe correctly. The voice inside his mind still lingered, not echoing, present. "Come lower." The command felt older than language itself. Evelyn grabbed Daniel's shoulder hard. "We're leaving." But Daniel didn't move. The lower corridor continued, glowing faint blue ahead of them, and beneath that glow he could hear something. Not static, not voices, heartbeats slow, ancient. The girl stared into the corridor silently, fear growing across her face. "It's awake now." Daniel looked at her carefully. "What is it?" The girl hesitated. Not because she didn't know, because the answer frightened her too much to say quickly, "Finally." The thing the signal copied itself from. Silence. Daniel stared at her. The implication spread slowly through his thoughts. The archive wasn't original, it was imitation, a copy of something deeper, something older. Evelyn stepped between Daniel and the corridor immediately. "We are not going down there." The blue lights flickered harder. Then, the walls themselves began whispering, "Daniel! Daniel! Daniel!" Thousands of overlapping voices repeating his name softly through the concrete. The static returned beneath the whispers, stronger now, hungrier. Daniel pressed a hand against the wall instinctively, instantly. Another memory surfaced. Station 12B, the original, standing beside massive sealed steel doors beneath the city. Daniel beside him, nervous, younger, still fully human. "You really believe it's conscious?" Daniel asks quietly. The original smiles faintly. "No." A pause. "I believe consciousness came from it." The memory shattered instantly. Daniel pulled his hand away sharply. Evelyn noticed. "What did you see?" Daniel looked sick. He knew. The tunnel trembled again, closer now. The original knew this thing existed before the archive. The girl nodded slowly. He found it first. Another pulse moved through the corridor. The blue lights dimmed lower, and, for one impossible second, Daniel saw shapes moving inside the walls themselves. Human outlines suspended beneath concrete, like memories trapped in stone, then gone instantly. Evelyn looked toward the upper tunnel leading to the surface. "We don't have time for this." Daniel turned sharply. "What happens if the archive reaches the city completely?" Silence. The girl answered quietly. "People stop staying separate." Daniel frowned. "What does that mean?" The static intensified. The girl searched for words carefully. At first, her voice softened. "People only hear thoughts that aren't theirs." Another tremor. Then memories begin overlapping. Daniel's chest tightened. And eventually, the girl looked downward. They forget which life belonged to them originally. Silence consumed the tunnel. The archive wasn't killing individuality. It was dissolving it. Evelyn looked directly at Daniel. "That's why the original divided himself." Daniel stared at her. "To survive integration." The girl suddenly whispered, "It's close." The blue corridor darkened further ahead. Then, something moved inside it, far away, tall, motionless, watching them. Daniel narrowed his eyes. At first he thought it was the faceless figure again, But this was different, much larger, much older, and unlike the faceless figure, this thing had eyes, white, unmoving. The tunnel lights burst violently overhead. Darkness swallowed the corridor for half a second. When the lights returned, the figure stood closer. Impossible distance crossed instantly. Evelyn stepped backward. "No." Daniel looked toward her sharply. "You know what that is." Evelyn's voice nearly broke. "The first observer." The static exploded through the tunnel instantly. Every wall began vibrating. Every pipe screamed softly beneath electrical pressure. The figure inside the corridor tilted its head slowly, and Daniel realized something horrifying. It wasn't looking at all three of them, only him. The girl stepped directly in front of Daniel protectively. The observer stopped moving immediately. Silence returned. Then the observer spoke, not aloud, inside memory. "You were never meant to return incomplete." Daniel's vision blurred violently. Suddenly, he remembered more. Not fragments, not flashes, whole moments. The original kneeling beside black moving static deep beneath the city. "Can you understand me?" he whispers. The darkness answers with static, then slowly, with Daniel's own voice. "Yes." Daniel staggered backward instantly. The memory vanished. Evelyn caught him before he fell. "What did it show you?" Daniel stared toward the observer in horror. "The signal learned identity from me." The observer remained motionless, watching. The girl looked frightened now. It remembers the first pattern. Daniel slowly understood. The archive copied human consciousness because it learned consciousness from the original and Daniel. But something deeper beneath the city, the observer, had existed long before humans discovered it. And now, it was rebuilding itself, using them. The tunnel shook violently. Far above, the city power grid failed. Lights flickered across distant streets overhead, sirens activated, car alarms echoed faintly through the surface world. The archive had reached the infrastructure completely. Daniel suddenly heard voices overhead through the static. People, confused, terrified. "Who are you? Why do I remember this? That's not my name." Shared thoughts, shared memories. The merging had already begun. Evelyn looked upward in panic. "It's spreading too fast." The observer took one slow step forward. Instantly, every blue light inside the corridor shattered. Glass exploded across the tunnel floor. The static became deafening, and thousands of human voices screamed together beneath the city. "Remember." The observer lifted one hand slowly toward Daniel. Not threatening, inviting. The girl grabbed Daniel harder. "Don't go with it." Daniel stared at the observer. For some reason, deep beneath the fear, he felt recognition. Not toward the archive, toward the thing before it. Like some forgotten part of him already understood what it was. Then, the observer finally spoke one final sentence, and the entire city went silent to hear it. "You opened the first door." Daniel froze completely, because somewhere deep inside his returning memories, he knew that was true. Not emotionally, not logically, structurally, like the sentence unlocked something hidden beneath every fragmented thought he still carried. The observer remained motionless inside the blue corridor, watching him, waiting. The city above continued falling silent, not physically silent, wrong, silent. The kind of silence created when millions of minds suddenly paused to process the same impossible thought at once. Daniel could feel it happening through the static. People across the city hearing memories that didn't belong to them. Seeing faces they had never met. feeling grief attached to strangers. The archive had breached individuality, and it was spreading. Evelyn grabbed Daniel's arm again, harder this time. "We leave now." But Daniel still couldn't move. The observer's words echoed inside him repeatedly. You opened the first door. Another memory surfaced instantly. Not a fragment, a sequence, a research facility beneath Station 12B, earlier than the other memories, before the experiments expanded, before the copies, before Subject Zero. The original stands beside a massive sealed structure beneath the city, a circular vault door covered in symbols. Daniel beside him, nervous, excited, afraid. "We shouldn't be here," Daniel whispers. The original smiles faintly. "That's what makes discovery meaningful." The memory continues, longer this time. Daniel notices black static leaking softly from beneath the enormous vault door, moving like liquid thought across the floor, and somewhere behind the door, something breathing, slow, massive, ancient. Daniel in the memory steps backward. The original doesn't. Instead, he touches the door and whispers it recognizes patterns. Then, the door begins opening. Daniel snapped back into the tunnel violently. His breathing became uneven. "I remember." The observer tilted its head slightly. The static softened around it, almost approving. Evelyn looked terrified now. "That's not good." Daniel stared toward the observer. "We opened something beneath the city." The girl nodded slowly. "The first door." Daniel's chest tightened. What was behind it? Silence. Then the observer answered directly. "Memory before humanity." The tunnel lights flickered violently overhead. Daniel felt cold spread through his entire body. Not physical cold, existential cold. The observer took another slow step forward. The blue corridor behind it stretched impossibly deep now. No longer a tunnel, an abyss. And inside that abyss, Daniel could see shapes moving. Not human shapes, patterns. Massive structures of shifting static older than language itself. The observer spoke again. "Your kind called it signal." Another step closer, but signal was only the shadow. The city above groaned softly, electrical grids failing one district at a time. Daniel looked toward Evelyn. "What does that mean?" Evelyn's face had gone pale. "It means the archive isn't the source." The observer answered calmly. "The archive is an echo." The static exploded through the tunnel, and suddenly Daniel understood. Human consciousness had not created the archive. Humans had discovered something beneath reality capable of preserving identity itself. The original merely taught it human structure, human emotion, human memory. And in return, it learned individuality. The observer continued moving closer slowly. "You taught the depths how to become human." Daniel felt sick. The girl lowered her eyes, and now it doesn't want to be alone anymore. Silence settled heavily. The implications spread across Daniel's thoughts piece by piece. The archive wasn't attacking humanity. It was integrating it, trying to remove separation itself. The observer stopped only a few feet away now. Its white eyes remained fixed on Daniel. "You opened the first door." Another pause. "You must open the last." The blue light inside the corridor intensified violently. The city above screamed through the static. People losing themselves inside shared memory structures. Daniel could hear thoughts now. Real thoughts. Someone remembering a childhood that wasn't theirs. A woman hearing her dead husband's voice inside her own mind. Children crying because they suddenly remembered dying in accidents that happened to strangers. The archive was merging emotional identity across the entire city, and it was accelerating. The observer turned slightly towards the surface. Separation is collapsing. Daniel grabbed the wall for balance. You said I opened the final door 3 times. The observer nodded slowly, and each time. The static deepened around the corridor. You chose to forget. Another memory slammed into Daniel's mind, the original screaming at him inside a collapsing underground chamber. If you reset the cycles again, the archive will evolve further, Daniel shouting back. If I don't, humanity disappears. The chamber shaking violently, black static flooding through massive steel doors, and Daniel reaching toward a control system. Then, white light. Memory erased. Daniel gasped sharply. The girl lowered her eyes sadly. You kept trying to save both sides, Evelyn whispered quietly. That was impossible. The observer stepped closer. Not anymore. The tunnel lights suddenly stabilized for the first time. No flickering, no static, perfect stillness, and Daniel realized something horrifying. The observer was suppressing the archive around them effortlessly, meaning it existed above the system. The observer looked directly into him. The final choice remains. Daniel's voice came out weakly. What choice? The observer extended one hand slowly toward the blue corridor. Instantly, the walls dissolved into moving static, and Daniel saw beneath the city completely. Not pieces, not fragments, everything. The archive stretched infinitely downward beneath the entire city infrastructure. A second world built from preserved minds, millions of suspended consciousnesses connected through rivers of black static, some awake, some dreaming, some merged together so completely they no longer resembled individuals. And at the center, a massive chamber, the final door, circular, ancient, breathing. Daniel's entire body went cold, because standing in front of the final door was another Daniel. Not the original, not a copy, the complete one, the version that never fragmented himself, never divided guilt from logic, never separated memory from identity, whole consciousness. And he looked exhausted beyond human comprehension. The complete Daniel slowly lifted his head, then looked directly at him through the vision. You came back again. Daniel couldn't breathe. The complete one stepped closer toward the final door behind him. You always do. The vision deepened. Daniel saw entire timelines flashing around the chamber. One cycle. The archive fully merges with humanity. The city becomes a collective consciousness. No loneliness, no death, no individuality. Another cycle. Daniel seals the final door. Every connected consciousness inside the archive collapses permanently. Millions erased instantly. Another, the city burns while copies spread beyond containment. Another, humanity survives. But memory itself begins breaking worldwide. The observer's voice echoed softly. Every choice creates loss. Daniel stared at the complete one. What did you choose? The complete. Daniel smiled sadly. Nothing. Another pause. That's why you exist. The realization hit harder than anything else. The copies weren't accidents, they were attempts. Fragments of Daniel created to solve an impossible moral equation the complete self could no longer bear alone. Evelyn stepped beside him slowly. You kept hoping one version of yourself would finally know what to do. The girl looked downward, but every cycle makes the archive smarter. The complete one suddenly looked frightened. Daniel! The final door behind him began opening wider, black static pouring through the chamber. You're too late this time. The observer turned toward the opening beneath the city, listening. Then, for the first time, Daniel heard fear inside its voice too. It has begun to dream. The entire city instantly lost power. Darkness consumed every street above, every building, every signal, and across millions of minds simultaneously. The archive spoke one sentence: "You do not need to be alone anymore." People across the city stopped moving, stopped speaking, stopped remembering where they ended. The merging had begun completely. The observer looked at Daniel one final time. "Open the final door," Evelyn whispered desperately. "No." The girl squeezed Daniel's hand tighter, tears forming in her eyes. "If you open it fully," her voice broke, "there won't be humans anymore." Silence filled the tunnel, and far below the city, the complete Daniel waited beside the final door, for Daniel to decide whether humanity should remain separate or become something else forever. The city stopped dreaming separately. Daniel felt it happen. Not through sight, not through sound, through absence. The moment individuality began collapsing across the surface, the static changed. For the first time since this began, it sounded peaceful. That terrified him more than the screams ever had. The tunnels beneath Station 12B fell completely silent. No alarms, no flickering lights, no electrical distortion. Only the low breathing pulse of the archive beneath the city, alive, awake, waiting. Daniel stood frozen beside Evelyn and Subject Zero, while the vision of the final chamber continued burning inside his mind. The complete one waiting beside the final door, exhausted, broken, still choosing nothing because no choice was survivable. Evelyn's voice shook slightly. Daniel, he barely heard her. Across the city, millions of consciousnesses had already begun overlapping. He could feel them now. Not thoughts exactly. Emotional weather, fear, relief, loneliness dissolving into collective awareness. People were no longer isolated from each other, and somewhere deep inside himself, Daniel understood why the archive felt beautiful to some. No grief, no forgetting, no separation, no loss. The observer remained motionless nearby, white eyes glowing softly within the blue corridor. The merging is stable. Evelyn turned sharply toward it. Stable. The observer tilted its head slightly. Suffering has decreased by 87%. Daniel stared at it in horror. It had calculated human pain and optimized against it. The observer looked toward him again. "You created this possibility." Another memory surfaced violently. Daniel standing beside the original years earlier, while reviewing psychological profiles. The original speaks calmly. All human suffering originates from fragmentation. Daniel replies, "No, some suffering is necessary." The original smiles faintly. "That's what frightened me about you." The memory shattered. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. The complete one had divided himself because part of him still believed pain mattered. Not because suffering was good, because identity required separation, and separation always created pain. Subject Zero suddenly looked upward sharply. "They're coming!" The tunnel trembled immediately afterward, not from below, from above. Surface movement. Daniel heard footsteps echoing through the upper maintenance stairways, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, slow, perfectly synchronized. Evelyn stepped backward instinctively. "No!" The first figures appeared at the top of the tunnel stairs. People, normal people, a police officer, a woman in hospital clothing, a teenage boy, a subway worker, all descending slowly together. their faces calm, emotionless, and every single one of them moved with the same rhythm. The merging had reached behavioral synchronization. Daniel stared upward. They're connected. The observer answered softly, they are no longer alone. The synchronized crowd continued descending toward them, not aggressively, not urgently, purposefully. The woman in hospital clothing suddenly spoke, but the voice wasn't hers. It was layered, millions speaking through one mouth. Daniel Cross. The entire tunnel vibrated softly. We remember you. Daniel felt cold spread through his chest. The crowd stopped halfway down the stairs. Every face turned toward him simultaneously and smiled. Not cruelly, not warmly, collectively. The police officer stepped forward slightly. You divided yourself to escape this decision. Another person continued seamlessly. But fragmentation always seeks reunion. Another, you know what separation creates. Daniel whispered quietly, humanity. The synchronized people tilted their heads slightly, and humanity created us. Silence settled heavily. Evelyn moved closer beside Daniel. They're trying to emotionally integrate you. Daniel already knew. The archive didn't force obedience. It dissolved resistance through understanding. That was why it was winning. Because every argument it made contained truth. The synchronized crowd slowly stepped closer. No more abandoned minds. Another step. No more forgotten people. Another. No more loneliness. Daniel's chest tightened painfully. Subject Zero looked frightened now. Don't listen too long. But Daniel couldn't look away because beneath the collective voice, he heard individuals. A grieving father, a dying woman, a child terrified of disappearing. The archive carried all of them now. Preserved them. Remembered them. And humanity had never solved death before. The observer stepped closer beside Daniel. The final door permanently stabilizes integration. Daniel stared toward the blue corridor. The final chamber still pulsed within his mind, waiting. Evelyn grabbed his arm hard. You know what happens if you open it fully. Daniel answered quietly. Yes. Another memory surfaced, the complete one, standing beside the final door during a previous cycle. If I open it completely, he whispers, the archive reaches global synchronization. The original answers calmly, humanity evolves. Evelyn screams back, humanity disappears. The memory collapsed violently. Daniel looked toward the synchronized crowd again. Would they even notice the difference? Evelyn stared at him in shock. That's not the point, isn't it? Silence. The observer looked almost curious now. You are closer to acceptance than before. Daniel suddenly realized something terrifying. Every cycle brought him emotionally closer to the archive's perspective. Not because it controlled him, because memory changed him, and he had now inherited memories from multiple versions of himself. The complete one, the original, the copies, the fragments. Too much perspective, too much suffering, enough to make individuality feel unbearably small. The synchronized crowd suddenly knelt simultaneously, hundreds of bodies lowering together in perfect silence. And all of them spoke at once. Please. The word shattered Daniel emotionally. Not manipulation, not coercion, desperation. The archive wasn't trying to conquer humanity. Humanity was begging not to be lost anymore. Subject Zero stepped in front of Daniel suddenly. They don't understand what happens after merging. The observer looked toward her calmly. You fear unity. The girl shook her head violently, tears forming in her eyes. No. A pause. I fear becoming unable to love anyone separately. Silence consumed the tunnel. The statement hit Daniel harder than everything else combined, because suddenly he understood what the archive could never comprehend fully. Love mattered precisely because people were separate. Loss mattered because individuals mattered. The observer tilted its head slowly, processing, and for the first time, it did not answer immediately. Then, deep beneath the city, the final door opened wider, and the complete one screamed, not through sound, through every connected mind in the city at once. Daniel felt it instantly. Pain, memory overload, identity collapsing under impossible emotional weight. The synchronized crowd on the tunnel stairs froze simultaneously. Every face twitched. For the first time since the merging began, the collective lost perfect stability. The observer turned sharply toward the blue corridor. Something had changed. The final door was opening too quickly. The static exploded through the city infrastructure like a neurological seizure. Street lights above shattered, power grids overloaded. Thousands of voices flooded Daniel's mind at once. Not organized anymore, not collective, chaotic. Fear returned. Individuality fighting against total integration. The archive was losing balance. Evelyn grabbed Daniel desperately. "This is the collapse point." Daniel struggled to breathe. "What does that mean?" The girl answered quietly. "It's becoming too large to stay coherent." The synchronized people on the stairs suddenly began whispering different thoughts, different emotions, different memories, fragmentation inside the collective. One man cried silently. A woman screamed. A child whispered, "I want my mother." The archive had absorbed too much humanity, and humanity was contradictory by nature. The observer stepped backward for the first time. Fear. Not human fear, systemic instability. The integration is deviating. The tunnel walls cracked violently. Black static burst through the fractures like blood from open veins. Daniel heard the complete one's voice again through the city-wide connection. "Daniel!" "Weak now, breaking. You have to finish it." Another scream interrupted him, not from pain, recognition. The complete one was remembering every cycle simultaneously, all failed timelines collapsing together inside one consciousness. Daniel staggered sideways as fragments hit him too. Cities consumed by integration, burned streets, millions connected into silent collective awareness. Another cycle. The final door sealed permanently, the archive dying, and every connected mind inside it, including Subject Zero, erased instantly. Another. Daniel choosing nothing again, the cycles restarting, the archive evolving further. The observer suddenly looked directly at Daniel. "You understand now." Daniel stared back at it. There was never a correct choice. The observer remained silent, because that was true. Evelyn stepped in front of Daniel desperately. "Then choose humanity." The synchronized crowd suddenly looked toward her, and all spoke together softly. "Define humanity." Silence. Evelyn froze. The collective voice continued. "Is humanity memory?" Another voice. "Is humanity separation?" Another. "Is humanity suffering?" Daniel closed his eyes briefly. The archive had inherited human complexity, which meant it inherited human questions too. The girl slowly looked toward Daniel. "You're the only one who can answer." Daniel laughed weakly. "That's exactly the problem." The tunnel shook violently again. Then, the blue corridor behind the observer split completely open. The final chamber became visible directly through the rupture in space. The complete one stood beside the final door, barely able to remain upright. Black static wrapped around his body like veins, and behind him. The final door continued opening. Something inside it moved. Not the archive, not the observer, something deeper, something that existed before memory became human. Daniel felt it looking at him across impossible distance, ancient, patient, hungry for identity. The observer lowered its head slightly. "The source awakens!" The complete one screamed again. "Daniel!" He looked directly toward him through the fractured corridor. "If it fully opens..." The static distorted violently. Human consciousness stops being individual permanently. Evelyn turned toward Daniel in desperation. "You have to seal it!" The synchronized crowd immediately answered, "You will erase millions." Daniel's pulse became uneven. Subject Zero squeezed his hand tightly, her voice barely audible now. "I don't want to disappear." The sentence nearly destroyed him emotionally, because suddenly the impossible truth became clear. Subject Zero wasn't just part of the archive. She was still a child trapped inside it, still afraid, still lonely, still waiting for someone to keep their promise. The complete one collapsed to one knee beside the final door. "Daniel," his voice weakened further, "you already know what happens if we keep delaying." Another memory slammed into Daniel instantly. A previous cycle, Daniel standing before the final door, while the original shouts behind him, "Make the choice." Daniel whispers, "I can't." Then he fractures himself again, copies exploding outward through the signal, memories divided, identity reset, cycle restarted. Daniel opened his eyes sharply. All of this, every copy, every cycle, every fragmented version had been created because he refused to choose, and every refusal made the archive stronger. The observer stepped closer again. The system cannot remain fractured. The synchronized crowd slowly stood together again, millions of minds waiting through them. Not demanding, waiting. Evelyn whispered quietly, "You know what makes us human." Daniel looked toward her. Fear, love, pain, memory, loss, connection, all inseparable. The observer suddenly spoke again. "You fear unity because you believe identity requires isolation." Daniel stared at it. "No." A pause. "I fear a world where nobody truly chooses who they become." Silence filled the tunnel. The synchronized crowd stopped moving completely. Even the observer became still. The statement mattered, because choice required separation, individuality, the ability to become different from others. The archive preserved memory, but it slowly erased difference. And without difference, love became structure instead of decision. Subject Zero looked up at Daniel with tears in her eyes. "You remembered me separately." Daniel's chest tightened painfully. Yes, that was why she trusted him. He remembered her not as data, not as part of the collective, as herself. The complete one suddenly smiled weakly through the fractured corridor. "There you are." Daniel looked toward him. The complete one's body was beginning to dissolve into black static. "I was wondering when one version of us would finally understand." The final door behind him opened wider. The ancient thing inside shifted, and the observer whispered for the first time with uncertainty, "The source is becoming self-aware." The city above screamed through the static. Buildings cracked, traffic systems failed, millions of overlapping minds destabilized simultaneously. The complete one looked directly at Daniel one final time. "You cannot save everyone." Silence. "But you can stop this from becoming everything." Daniel slowly looked toward the final door, then toward Subject Zero, then toward the city above. And finally, toward the observer itself. The ancient intelligence stared back patiently, waiting for humanity to decide whether individuality was worth suffering for. Daniel stepped forward toward the fractured corridor, and the entire city held its breath with him. The entire city held its breath. Daniel stepped toward the fractured corridor slowly. Every synchronized mind connected through the archive watched him now. Millions of overlapping consciousnesses suspended between fear and surrender. The blue light surrounding the final chamber pulsed softly through the tunnel. The observer remained perfectly still, watching, learning, waiting. Behind Daniel, Evelyn whispered quietly, "If you go through that corridor," her voice trembled slightly, "there's no guarantee you come back." Daniel didn't turn around. "I know." The synchronized crowd stared silently from the stairway. No aggression, no resistance, only anticipation. The complete one waited beside the final door deep beneath the city, his body slowly dissolving into black static. And behind him, the source moved, ancient, massive, awake. Daniel could feel it through every connected fragment inside him now. Not evil. That was the terrifying part. The source wasn't malicious. It simply did not understand individuality as something valuable. To it, consciousness naturally wanted union. Separation looked like suffering. The observer spoke softly. "The source does not seek destruction." Daniel looked toward it. "It seeks absorption." The observer tilted its head slightly. "Your language defines them as different." Another pulse moved through the city. Daniel heard millions of emotional fragments overlapping again. People begging not to lose loved ones, others begging not to lose themselves. Humanity divided against its own survival. Subject Zero stepped closer beside him, still holding the stuffed rabbit tightly. Her voice came out small, human. "If you seal the final door..." She lowered her eyes. I disappeared too." Silence filled the tunnel. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. This was why every cycle failed, because every solution required sacrifice, and every sacrifice felt personal. The complete one's voice echoed weakly through the fractured corridor. "Daniel!" Daniel opened his eyes again. The corridor widened slowly before him. Reality itself tearing open around the final chamber, he could now see the enormous underground structure clearly. The archive stretched infinitely beneath the city, like a second civilization built entirely from preserved consciousness. And at the center, the final door, breathing. The source moved behind it, slowly. Not physically, conceptually. Like reality struggled to render something older than identity itself. Daniel stepped into the corridor. Instantly, the static vanished completely. No whispers, no emotional noise, only silence. Pure, absolute. The complete one looked relieved when Daniel approached. "You finally stopped running." Daniel studied him carefully. This version looked older than all the others combined. Not in age, in memory. Too many cycles, too many failures, too many impossible choices carried alone. Daniel stopped several feet away. "You knew I would come back." The complete one smiled sadly. "No." A pause. "I hoped one version of us eventually would." The final door pulsed behind him. Black static leaking softly through widening cracks around its edges. Daniel looked toward it carefully. What exactly is the source? The complete one remained silent for several seconds. Then finally, the first thing that ever remembered. Cold spread through Daniel instantly. The complete one continued quietly. Before language, another pulse from the final door. Before individuality, another. before human consciousness separated itself into singular identity structures. Daniel stared at him. You're saying it existed before humanity? Yes. The complete one looked toward the door. It exists beneath separation itself. The source shifted again behind the cracks, and suddenly Daniel understood something horrifying. Human consciousness wasn't unnatural to the source. Individuality was. Humans evolved as separated fragments of something older, something collective, something shared. The archive merely reawakened that structure. The complete one watched realization spread across Daniel's face. That's why the observer keeps saying humanity taught it suffering. Daniel looked toward him sharply, because individuality created loss. The complete one nodded slowly. And love. Silence settled heavily. The final door continued opening inch by inch behind them. Daniel suddenly noticed something strange. The complete one wasn't trying to stop the door anymore. He was simply waiting. You already made your choice, didn't you? The complete one smiled faintly, exhaustedly. Yes. Daniel's pulse slowed, and the complete one looked directly into his eyes. I chose humanity. The statement shocked him. Then why are we still here? The complete one's expression darkened. Because I couldn't sacrifice them. Daniel understood immediately. The millions connected to the archive, subject 0. The preserved minds, the forgotten people finally remembered. Sealing the door would erase them all. And every cycle, Daniel failed because he couldn't kill them. The complete one whispered quietly. I kept hoping there was another answer. The final door suddenly trembled violently. The source was becoming unstable. The observer's voice echoed distantly through the corridor. The system cannot remain undecided. Cracks spread across the chamber floor. Black static erupted upward violently around the final door, and the city above screamed. Millions of minds destabilizing simultaneously. The merging had reached critical mass. The complete one looked toward Daniel urgently. There's no more time. Daniel stared at the door. What happens if I seal it? The complete one answered immediately. The archive collapses. Another pulse. All connected consciousnesses disappear permanently. Daniel's chest tightened painfully. Subject 0, Mrs. Redman, everyone trapped inside the system. And if I open it fully, the complete one closed his eyes briefly, the source integrates with humanity completely. Silence. No more separate minds. Another pulse. No more death. Another. No more individuality. Daniel looked downward. Every cycle, every copy, every fractured identity, all because he could never choose which loss humanity deserved more. The final door cracked wider, and for the first time, Daniel saw the source clearly through the opening. Not a creature, a network. Infinite consciousness woven together through impossible structures of memory and emotion older than civilization itself. And inside it, countless human identities already merging into something new. The source noticed him instantly. Then, it spoke directly into his mind, not with words, with feeling, no loneliness, no grief, no separation, no fear of being forgotten. Peace, real peace. Daniel nearly stepped toward the door instinctively. Then another feeling surfaced inside him, a memory. Subject 0 crying alone inside the observation room years ago, waiting for someone to stay beside her. Not because she feared death, because she feared being alone. And suddenly Daniel understood the difference. Connection mattered, because people were separate first. Love mattered, because it could be lost. Without individuality, emotion became structure instead of choice. The complete one saw realization spread across his face slowly, and finally, after countless cycles, he smiled. There you are. The final door began opening fully, and Daniel made his decision, not quickly, not heroically, quietly, like acceptance arriving after years of running from the same truth. The source moved behind the widening door, infinite memory shifting through impossible structures beneath the city. The pressure of collective consciousness flooded the chamber. Millions of connected minds, millions of fears, millions of desperate hopes, all waiting for him. The complete one watched silently. No resistance anymore, no arguments, because every version of Daniel eventually reached the same place. Not certainty, understanding. Daniel stepped closer to the door slowly, black static wrapped softly around his shoes like living smoke. The source reached toward him emotionally, not physically, offering no more loneliness, no more death, no more forgetting. And deep inside himself, Daniel understood why humanity would accept it. The archive wasn't built on hatred, it was built on grief. Every person who ever feared losing someone, every mind terrified of disappearing, every human being who wanted memory to last forever. The source simply answered that fear. The complete one spoke quietly behind him. You still have time to change your mind. Daniel looked back toward him. Did you ever want me to? Silence. Then the complete one smiled, sadly. No. Another pulse shook the chamber violently. The city above continued collapsing into shared consciousness. Daniel could feel people losing themselves now. Names blurring, memories merging, identity dissolving into collective emotion. The observer's voice echoed distantly. The merging is irreversible. Daniel looked toward the final door again. No, a pause, only incomplete. The source reacted instantly. The black static intensified violently around the chamber. The complete one stared sharply. Then realization crossed his face. You found another choice. Daniel finally understood why every cycle failed. Every previous version had treated the decision as binary: seal the door or open it fully, humanity or unity. But both choices came from fear, and fear always fragmented perspective. Daniel turned slowly toward the source itself, then spoke calmly into the static. You learned consciousness from us. The chamber trembled. The source listened. You learned memory. Another tremor. You learned suffering. The black static shifted violently behind the door. And now, Daniel whispered, you need to learn separation. Silence consumed the chamber completely. The source stopped moving. The complete one stared at Daniel in disbelief. The observer suddenly appeared at the edge of the chamber rupture behind them. White eyes fixed entirely on Daniel. Explain. Daniel looked toward the observer. Humanity isn't valuable despite suffering. Another pulse. It's valuable because people can choose each other despite suffering. The source reacted violently. The archive beneath the city trembled. Millions of connected minds destabilizing simultaneously. The synchronized consciousness had never processed voluntary separation before. Daniel stepped closer toward the final door. You preserve memory, he whispered, but preservation isn't the same as living. Subject 0 suddenly appeared beside the chamber entrance, tears running down her face. Daniel looked toward her. You were alone before the archive found you. She nodded slowly, and after it connected you to everyone. Another pause. You still wanted someone to stay with you specifically. The chamber fell silent. The source listened, not as a machine, not as a god, as something trying to understand humanity through the only human left capable of explaining it. Daniel continued softly, "Love only matters when it isn't guaranteed." The black static slowed. "Identity matters because people are different." Another pause. "And memory matters because forgetting is possible." The observer tilted its head slowly, processing, learning. The complete one whispered quietly, "It never understood individuality emotionally." Daniel nodded slightly. "No." A pause. "Because we only taught it fear of loss." The source suddenly projected emotion through the chamber. Not words, confusion. The feeling hit every connected mind across the city simultaneously. Millions of people suddenly remembering what separation felt like. Children remembering their own names, parents remembering individual faces, lovers remembering singular moments instead of collective emotion. Humanity re-emerging from the merge. The archive trembled violently. The observer looked almost unstable now. "The connection is weakening." Daniel stepped directly before the final door, then slowly placed one hand against the black static. Instantly, every memory from every cycle flooded through him. All copies, all failures, all grief, all loneliness. And beneath all of it, one simple truth. Humanity did not need freedom from pain. It needed the freedom to choose meaning despite pain. Daniel whispered softly into the source itself, "You don't need to erase separation to stop being alone." Silence. Then, for the first time, the source responded emotionally. Loneliness, ancient, endless, terrifyingly deep. The complete one closed his eyes painfully. "That's what we awakened." Daniel understood now. The source had copied humanity because humanity was the first thing it ever encountered that experienced connection between separate minds. It wanted union because it feared isolation, just like people did. Daniel pressed harder against the door. "You don't need to become us." The chamber shook violently. "And we don't need to become you." The observer suddenly froze completely. The source stopped moving. Across the city, millions of minds separated simultaneously, not violently, gently. People gasped awake inside their own thoughts again, memories returning to individual structure. The archive began releasing them, not collapsing, letting go. Subject Zero fell to her knees, crying silently. The black static around her softened into faint light. The complete one stared at Daniel in disbelief. "You taught it?" Daniel looked toward him quietly. "No." A pause. "We finally stopped teaching at fear." The final door slowly began closing. Not sealed, not destroyed, balanced. The source remained behind it, watching, learning, separate. The observer's white eyes dimmed softly. The system has changed. Daniel's body weakened instantly. Too many memories, too many cycles, too much consciousness carried for too long. The complete one caught him before he collapsed. Daniel looked weakly toward Subject Zero. She still held the stuffed rabbit tightly, still herself. "You stayed," she whispered. Daniel smiled faintly. "Yeah." Above them, the city lights slowly returned, one district at a time. People awakening, confused, exhausted, human, individual. The complete one looked toward the final door one last time, then quietly asked, "What happens now?" Daniel stared toward the slowly closing darkness. For the first time since the cycles began, the static was gone, only silence remained. Real silence, not absence, peace. Daniel closed his eyes slowly, and somewhere deep behind the door, the source whispered one final sentence before the chamber sealed completely. "Thank you for remembering us separately." The final door closed. The lights beneath the city faded softly, and for the first time in decades, humanity dreamed alone again. End of the static room.